All right, guys, we're back to our second part of chapter 29 lesson on subjunctive imperfect. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you. Make sure I am recording, and I am recording. Let me go ahead and share the screen. I believe this is it here. Yeah, that's it. All right, let's jump in here. We looked yesterday at how to form the subjunctive and in the imperfect, as well as the forms for subjunctive, sum, and possum. Hopefully you have worked on that last night. Let's jump into the use of subjunctive. This was the list we looked at last week. You can see there's a whole lot of different uses for subjunctive. That's why it's very important that we learn subjunctive and make sure we get it down, because each of these have a very unique usage in the Latin language, and so we need to learn these well. Last week we looked at the adjessive or hortatory adjessive. We said, again, you translated that like let us or let them. It's a command basically for first person and third person, and it's used as a independent clause. It's like the main verb in the main verb of the sentence. So we looked at that, but most of the time subjunctive is used as the verb in the dependent clause, and we introduced that last week with the purpose clause. And to give you a reminder, in English, a purpose clause is something like, I studied Latin so that I might do well on my ACTs. The purpose of studying Latin, the main verb here, is so that I might do well on my ACTs. It's the purpose. The subjunctive is the second verb in that dependent clause. Today, however, we're going to look at result clauses, and purpose clauses and result clauses are very similar in some ways, but they have very unique uses. Obviously, purpose shows you something different than result. So let's take a look at this here. Purpose clause, as a reminder, it's a subordinate clause indicating the objective of the action in the main clause, and the purpose clause answers the question, why was it done? Whatever the main verb is, whatever that action is, why was it done? Okay, you'll recognize it by obviously a subjunctive in the secondary clause. It will be introduced by ut, or if it's a negative, it will be introduced by a ne. Okay, and it is stating the purpose of the action in the main clause. And the translation, generally you will use may or might. May for present tense, might for imperfect tense. Okay, but it's better to translate, I'm not sure what happened, there we go. Better to translate to or in order to. Okay, I studied Latin to do well on my ACTs. I studied Latin in order to do well on my ACTs. But you can say may. I studied Latin so that I might do well. You could say it that way. And you use may for present tense. And then lastly, here's an example. We study Latin in order to know more about Rome. Okay. All right. And maybe that would be better saying a little bit more about the Romans. So let's look at the purpose clause. Let's see how this is different and how it's similar. Result clause is a subordinate clause that tells the result of the action in the main verb or main clause. The result clause answers the question, what is the outcome? What is the result of the action of the main verb? You'll recognize it because it is introduced by ut, subjunctive clause, a verb that is in the dependent clause as a subjunctive verb, and it's introduced by nut. So this is just like by ut, not nut, ut. This is just like the purpose clause, actually. However, the purpose clause is introduced by a ne for negative. Here you won't see that. In the result clause, a negative result will have an adverb like non or numquam or some other nonne. It'll have another adverb in there. It will not be introduced by a ne. The other thing that makes this different than a purpose clause is that you will have an adverb like ita, tam, or sic, but that basically is translated as so or so much. Oh, excuse me, just so. And then an adjective like tantus. It could be one or the other. And tantus means like so much or so great. And this will indicate a degree and that a result is following. This will make more sense when I give you an example in just a minute here. So how do you translate it? You basically translate the subjunctive like it's indicative. That's all there is to it. You translate the subjunctive like it's indicative in a result clause. And you don't really use may or might. You really reserve may or might for a purpose clause, not for result clause. So basically just change the subjunctive to an indicative. Let me give an example here. In English, we studied Latin so much that we passed the test. Okay, so it's introduced by ut, and you translate that as that. So we studied Latin so much that we passed the test. Let's look at an example in Latin. We'll look at a couple examples, and then you'll be off to studying on your own. Here's an example. Tanta fecit ut urbem servarit. You got tanta, which is an adverb meaning, an adjective actually, it should be an adjective, meaning so great. And that's a typo there. You've got your main verb, fecit, that is active, indicative, perfect. So it's translated he did. You got your conjunction ut, that means that. Urbem is the direct object. It's accusative. It means the city. And then you have your subjunctive verb, active, subjunctive, imperfect. Notice it's the infinitive plus an ending, T. So it's the active, subjunctive, imperfect, third person singular. And that translates as he saved, because again, his result clause, we're just going to translate it as indicative. So let's put it all together. Fecit, he did. Tanta, so great. He did so great. Or you could say such great things, right? Because so great doesn't sound so good. He did such great things. Okay, tanta is an adjective here. He did such great things that he saved, servarit, the city, urbum. He did such great things that he saved the city. And all you simply did was change the subjunctive into an indicative, he saved. Let's look at this, compare it to a very similar sentence, but this time it's a purpose clause. It's a very similar sentence. And it says, haec fecit ut urbem servarit. Again, you've got your verb fecit, it's indicative perfect. This time we've got haec as your direct object, accusative. You've got ut, your conjunction, urbem, direct object, accusative. And again, servarit is imperfect subjunctive. But this time it's a purpose clause, and you can tell it's purpose by a couple of things. First, it's introduced by ut. Did you say so was the result clause? But notice the result clause had either a tanta, which you see at the beginning, or it would have had a sic or an ita or a tam. That makes it the result clause. And because you don't see that here, you know it's a purpose clause. The lack of that adjective or adverb, again, I apologize, that's a typo. That should be adjective at the top there. But without that, introduced by ut, you know it's a purpose clause. So we are going to translate the subjunctive as subjunctive, and we're going to use may or might. In this case, since it is imperfect tense, we're going to use might. He might save. So putting it all together, fecit, he did these things, haec, he did these things, so that, ut, so that he might save, servarit, he might save urbem, the city. He did these things so that he might save the city. And I just got a couple of notes to point out here. Notice that this verb here is imperfect. And so because it's a result clause, we're going to translate like it's indicative. So result clause equals subjunctive being translated as indicative. And the bottom one here, it's a purpose clause and it's imperfect. So purpose clause equals either using may or might, depending on the tense. Here it's imperfect, so we used might. So these two sentences are very similar, but one indicates the result. The result of him doing such good things is, as a result, the city was saved. The second sentence is purpose. Why did he do these things? He did these things so that the city might be saved. That was his purpose, that the city might be saved. Okay? So that's the difference. I'm going to show you one more example. Here's a result clause. Tam strenue laborat ut multa perficiat. Tam is your adverb, meaning so. Strenue is an adverb also, meaning energetically. You've got your main verb here, laborat. It's active, indicative, present tense, and it means he works. Then you've got ut, your conjunction, meaning that. Multa is your direct object, accusative, meaning many things. And perficiat, notice it is subjunctive. Now, how do you know it's subjunctive? You notice it's subjunctive because the word perficiat is a third conjugation, a third IO conjugation verb. And as a result, it has an IA in that vowel shift, IA. Remember, he beat a giant, IA. So you have a vowel shift from an I to an IA. So that means it's subjunctive present tense, okay? And so let's look at this. We put it all together here. He works, laborat. So, Tom, so, strenue, energetically. He works so energetically that, ut, he accomplishes Now, remember, because this is a result clause, we translate result clause like the subjunctive is indicative. So he accomplishes it. Accomplishes, I can't say that right. Accomplishes, sounds funny. He accomplishes multa, many things. He works so energetically that he accomplishes many things. So let's look at a very similar sentence, but this is a purpose clause. And it's strenua laborat ut multa perficiat. Again, your adverb strenue, laborat, your verb he works, your ut conjunction, perficiat, again, a subjunctive verb in the present tense. And then multa is your direct object in the accusative plural. So again, he works, laborat, strenue, energetically, ut, so that, and because perficiat is subjunctive, and again, this is a purpose clause. You say, well, how do you know that it's a purpose clause? Because it's a dependent clause, subjunctive dependent clause, introduced by ut, and does not have an eta, tom, sic. Again, look at that top line there. Tom, that's in the result clause. If you don't see it, then you know it's a purpose clause. And as a result, we're going to translate this verb as subjunctive, may or might. In this case, it's present tense, so we're going to say may. He works energetically so that he may accomplish many things. And again, point this out, subjunctive, if you can't see behind my little picture, is result clause equals subjunctive being translated as indicative. He accomplishes this translated as indicative. But down here is a purpose clause. Purpose clause means you use may or might. And here, since perficiat is present tense, we use may. He works energetically so that he may accomplish these things. So these are two examples how to translate result clause and purpose clause, whether it's imperfect or present tense, it doesn't matter. These are the ways that you translate it. Do your work, practice the work that I provided for you. If you have any questions, give me a holler and see if I can't give you a hand. Have a good day.